So at 50, I realized that I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I was because trauma had altered my identity and had me showing up as who I had become and not as who God created me to be. And this is exactly what happened to me. I was showing up as who I needed to be in order to survive the trauma, in order to survive what was happening to me, in order to just get through life. At some point early on, I checked out. So I spent many years going in autopilot. I was just showing up how I needed to get through another day, to live through another day. And this is what trauma does. It alters who you are, or at least changes the way that you should be seeing yourself. So for me, the trauma was... Hello, everyone. I'm Lease Youmans, and welcome to the Straight Outta Trauma series. What you're about to step into isn't just a discussion, it's deliverance. I want you to know this is for you. The one who cried in silence, the one who smiled through pain, the one still asking, will I ever be whole? This is a safe space for healing, for truth, and for permission to breathe again. So exhale, lean in, and let's begin Straight Outta Trauma. So now that you're here, I want to remind you that you've entered a safe space. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to play it safe. We are facing and exposing trauma because trauma is more than just a word. But before we get into it, I want you to be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode out. So let's get started. And I'm going to start out by actually giving the definition of the word trauma as given by the American Psychological Association. And they define trauma as any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, helplessness, dissociation, confusion, or other disrupted feelings intense enough to have a long-lasting negative effect on a person's attitudes, their behavior, and other aspects of functioning. Traumatic events include those caused by human behavior, such as rape, war, industrial accidents, as well as by nature, such as earthquakes, and often challenge an individual's view of the world as a just, safe, and predictable place. And I want to read something else concerning what trauma and how trauma can not just affect us mentally, but also physically. So sometimes trauma can go beyond the psychological damage and wear on our physical health. Trauma can change our cellular structure and brain chemistry over time, leading to illnesses, immune system deficiencies, possibly even life-threatening diseases, and a shorter lifespan, according to Jess Johnson. So let's get into trauma. And I wanted to be sure I mentioned that trauma is more than a word. It seems like a big word that is presently being used, maybe started a few years ago with this word trauma, which is a good thing because now that people are recognizing what trauma is, trauma can be exposed. And not only can trauma be exposed, the root cause of trauma can be exposed because trauma is not the same for everyone. Everyone doesn't deal with it the same way. Everyone doesn't handle it the same way. They don't react to it the same way. And also, trauma doesn't come about the same way for everyone. Back to the definition, it says it can be caused by rape, war, industrial accidents. Sometimes what's going on in your home, if there's abuse, verbal, emotional, sexual abuse, it can be caused by domestic violence. It's so many things that can cause trauma a person's life. So it's just really not the same for everyone. So even when we're reading the definition, not one thing is always a blanket statement for everyone. So I'm just going to talk about what caused trauma in my life. I want to think of it as this is like an entryway because the act of a certain thing is like the entryway or the doorway. Somebody might even say the gateway for trauma to enter into someone's life. And again, trauma is like not the act that happened to you, but what happens after that act happens to you, whatever that was. So for me, the trauma was childhood sexual abuse from the ages of 12 to 17 years old. So that act, and it started at the very first touch. And even though going through and dealing with that and all the mental things that I had to go through, especially as a young child, you really just don't know what the severity of that is causing in your life. And trauma can really be a big word, and you may not have the words for it. I know I didn't have the words for it. I didn't have the understanding as to what was happening to me at the time. And I know that's not expected, but in most cases, I would say for all children that deal with sexual abuse and any other abuses that are happening in their life, it could be a verbal or emotional abuse. You just don't understand what's happening at that time. And for me, when all of this happened and the trauma started, my mind began to try to, like this race, trying to catch up with what was happening, and was never able to, because you're a child and there's just some things that should not happen in your life, and that you should not be experiencing as you're going through life. So, but in my mind, because this is what happened to me, it was a sexual violation. So my mind was always trying to catch up with that and understand why this thing was happening to me. And now that it's happening to me, how am I going to navigate it? Even though I couldn't put all of those things into words, that's what my mind was trying to do, put it into words at that time, at that young age. I even went places in my mind like, okay, I know I'm a 12-year-old. However, how can I become an adult really quick? Because sexual acts only happen between adults. And so that was my way of thinking. So I was always trying to catch up with what was happening to me. And I do want to talk about just some things that trauma did to me. And I'm just going to give like a few, maybe two or three here. I actually wrote a book about this called Triumphant, A Journey from Trauma to Triumph. And I'm going to be reading a few excerpts from that book. And so one of the things trauma did, it silenced my voice, and it can silence your voice or cause you to speak in a whisper instead of a roar. It alters your identity, and it also distorts your worth, or distorts the way that you see yourself, like you're not worthy, you're not deserving certain type of things. And that's what trauma does. It alters who God created you to be. Now, I would go so far as to say it can't necessarily erase who God created us to be, because that's who God created us to be. But it can alter the way you show up, and it can just alter the way that you look at yourself when something so traumatic happens to you, especially at a young age. And I just don't want to focus on childhood sexual abuse, but there's also other ways that trauma can happen. Back to the definition, it could war, accidents. If someone saw someone lose their life, it could be very traumatic situations. Some situations people go through, they may get over it quickly. In some situation people go through, they may not ever get over it. When we talk about wars and being in the military, we hear of post-traumatic stress disorder. That's some trauma concerning that was caused by their experience. And even when we talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it doesn't necessarily happen to people that have experienced war. It can happen to people that have experienced some type of violation sexually, or domestic abuse, or child abuse. So, like I said, this is just not a blanket for everyone. It can show up in different type of ways. But I did want to read something concerning part one of my book. So part one of my book is called The Makings of Me. And I open up by saying it's not a matter of if, because you are in a process becoming something. It's a matter of who you are becoming. And then there's a question on why you became who you became. And then it's amazing how trauma can seep through the very fibers of your being, alter your DNA and have you showing up as who you have become in order to survive and not as the person God intended for you to be. And this is exactly what happened to me. I was showing up as who I needed to be in order to survive the trauma, in order to survive what was happening to me, in order to just get through life. At some point early on, I checked out. So I spent many years going in autopilot. So just showing up how I needed to get through another day, to live through another day. And this is what trauma does. It alters who you are, or at least changes the way that you should be seeing yourself. You can have somebody that they were, and I would take me for instance, somebody that was at that particular moment more so independent or growing into my independence. But when that happened, that was like taken away from me. And I began to see myself as a victim. Now, was I a victim of what happened to me? Absolutely. But over a prolonged period of time, because I didn't deal with the trauma, I was just a victim over and over and over and over again, until I had to say that everybody's not out to get me. Everyone is not out to hurt me. And I had to overcome that part of it. Now, I will say throughout my journey, certain things I was able to like overcome and be healed from and be delivered from. And then there were certain things that stayed with me, like the cycles, the negative patterns that were in my life, the negative thoughts that were in my mind. Those things just kept going on and on for a prolonged amount of time. And when we don't deal with things, they deal with us. So when I wasn't dealing with the trauma, it was really dealing with me. It was trauma became my GPS. So a lot of times I was trauma led. My emotions were trauma led. They were rooted in the trauma. My thoughts were trauma led thoughts. They were rooted in the trauma. The negative cycles and patterns in my life were rooted in the trauma. It's because I just wasn't dealing with it. And there's another word I'm going to read the definition to here. It's dissociate. And it's to separate from association or union with another. This unites. And there are quite a few times when people have experienced, especially sexual abuse or something traumatic early on in their life as a child, they dissociate. And that's just your mind protecting you from what happened, protecting you from the thoughts, protecting you from the feeling, protecting you from the experience of what you went through. So your mind begins to protect you from that. And at some point in my life, I dissociated from what happened to me. And mine was really like, so I would say a conscious decision, but when I'm thinking about it, I really didn't have any control over it. It was just another way my mind was trying to protect me from what happened to me, even though I was already at this particular point in my 20s when I dissociated from this. I disconnected. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. It had already caused a whole lot of issues in my life. One of the cycles I was in was self-sabotage. I was already not feeling worthy, not feeling good about myself, poor self-image, low self-esteem, very promiscuous, angry. I was all of those things. And I was like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. I don't want this to have anything else to do in my life. I wish it was that easy, that we can push a button and say, okay, I'm turning this off. It doesn't have anything to do with me. But here's the thing, everything that I went through after that, now I know it was some things before that I went through was directly connected to it, but everything I went through after that was connected and rooted in trauma. My life, it didn't make my life any better. And by me just saying, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with it, it probably, for the most part, made my life worse. And I'm saying that to this point that because I did not deal with it, because I did not get to the root and uproot it and heal from it, I just found myself in situations and circumstances that over time, things get worse and worse, even though it could have been the same situation, same circumstance, the same cycle, the same pattern. that I was going through. But over time, when you continue to go through something and you continue to have pressure put on you and you're not dealing with the thing, and it seemed like one thing after the other, after the other, after the other, it is a lot. It just continues to compound and continue to weigh you down. And even though I kept moving forward, it was at a very slow pace. And really, sometimes you move forward, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've made any progress. I was moving forward, but think about cycles. And then we think about a bicycle or even the tires on the car. They're going in a circle of motion. So they're moving forward, but they're still connected to the car. They can only go so far as where the car goes. And when the car stops, it stops. So it's like you're making progress. Not really though, but in a life situation, but you're just going around and around and around in the same circle over and over and over and over and over again. So I guess we can put it more so if you turn a bicycle upside down and spin the wheel, it's not going anywhere, but it's moving, it's going in a circle. So that's how my life was. Like I was not going anywhere, but I was always moving. And not only that, not only was I always moving, I was already always all over the place mentally, emotionally, even spiritually, because trauma caused a lot of chaos in my life. There was really no clarity in my life. I was just from one thing to the next thing. And that too was like my defense mechanism, because the more I moved, I didn't allow myself time to sit and think about what happened to me. Not saying that those thoughts did not come, but I was never sitting in those thoughts. I was always moving, always keeping myself distracted, always from one project to the next project, doing this, doing that, over here, over just all literally all over the place, all over the place, and at the same time going nowhere. And the thing about ourselves, wherever we go, there we are. That could be the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifference. So wherever I went, no matter how many things I was doing, no matter how much I tried to distract myself from what had happened to me, it was still there. And because I did not deal with it, it was always going to be there. And that's what happened when you don't uproot something, or when you don't get healed from a thing, it's always there. Me not acknowledging the trauma or the root of my trauma didn't make it go away. All it did was really allow it to grow more, allow it to be more magnified in my life. Even if no one actually knew what had happened to me, it was still magnified in my life through the life that I was living, through my actions, through my thoughts, through my words, through the situations and circumstances that I found myself in, through the place where I found myself in life. There was a point in my life that over an 18-year time frame, I had lived in 15 different places. Some of those places were places of my own until things happened. I got to that part in the cycle, and it was like the rug was being snatched from underneath my feet. Living with family members, living with church members, homeless shelters, or a women's transitional housing. That was part of that trauma cycle because I did not deal with the trauma. I always felt like I could just never rise above the turbulence that was in my life. And I do go into more detail about the things that I'm saying now in my book and talk about more situations and circumstances that I found myself in. But for me, it was like I just could never rise above the turbulence. Like when you think of being on an airplane and you go through that turbulence, either the pilot of the plane is going to go higher to get above, or if he can't go through it, he'll come down a little lower until he get to a spot where he can rise to where he needs to be. I was never able to get through it. So I would get there and I would find myself back down again, and not in a place where I'm just cruising but crashing. I would find myself back down to the place that I did not want to be. And all throughout my life, I would keep questioning myself and also God, like, why does this keep happening to me? Not that I was above things in life, the things that you encounter, the trouble, the situations happening to me. But my question really was why? Like, what is the cause of these things that are happening to me? What is it that I keep doing wrong that I can't seem to get further in life and get to the place where I desire to be in life? And then there were times that God would bring that to me, like the sexual abuse that happened, the trauma that I was dealing with. And because I dissociated from it, because I can disconnect it, I was like, no, that can't be it. Because I really put that over to the side and I'm just going to live my life without it. However, had I acknowledged it and had I really realized that that was from God, because even at the moment, I didn't realize that was God answering my prayer as to what was going on. And not only answering my prayer, but just inviting me to get into a place where I was being healed, where I was dealing with the things that was now leading my life, that trauma. And so it would take me years, many years, to get to a place where I was actually able to acknowledge that. For many years, not just asking God the simple question that's like, why this is happening to me. I will also say to God, I just feel disconnected. I feel like something is missing in my life. And when whatever this thing is, whatever this golden nugget, this key is, whatever it is, everything is just going to click and come together and I'm going to be okay. Because it always felt like I just never could connect the dots in my life. I just never could put A and B together. Like nothing came together. I just never could connect those things in my life. Like my mind was just not able to grasp it and get a hold of whatever this thing was. And I thought it was just something outside of me that I needed. But the thing was, it was always on the inside of me. It was the trauma that was on the inside of me that was keeping me from being able to connect those dots, that was keeping me in a place of chaos and confusion and in a place of distraction and in a place of holding on to these little vices that I had. I talked about the fact that I was promiscuous. One of the things with that is because in my early 20s, I was like, if that sexual act was done to me wrongly, then how can I correct that? So here, my mind again. So the mind really goes through a whole lot of things, especially, and I can only speak to sexual abuse, and I'm quite sure with other things that people experience that like is an entryway for trauma in their lives. So I was just trying to fix what was broken, and it just led down to more trouble, more confusion, more chaos, more of me feeling little about myself, more distortion of my worth, of my value. So those type of things. And another thing I had, we talk about in this book also, the comfort foods. My comfort foods was sweets. So then this started shortly after the abuse happened, where sweets was my getaway. And I took my time when I was eating the sweets. It was like I was in my happy place. I was like a cow gonna take me away moment. It was like that. And just for that moment, I had the sweets and I was just away from what all of the turmoil, all of the chaos, and just that taste of the sweet and all of that just took me to another place. And I took my time because I wanted to stay away from reality as long as possible. And so sometimes we see people, they may have experienced some type of trauma or maybe still dealing with trauma in their life. We see people turn to drugs, people turn to alcohol, people turn to all other kind of things. On the negative side of things, people are turning to these things, and it's to help them get through the trauma and deal with the trauma. And it's always temporary fix. So when that wear off, you need to get it again. Thankfully, mine was just sweets and not any type of drugs or alcohol. So that was the thing for me. And that was because of the trauma. And so, like I said, we're just really exposing what trauma is, because it's more than just the word. It's also what trauma does to you and how trauma makes you feel, how trauma makes you go through life, and where it leads you through life. You're all over the place, but if you just deal with the root of it. So getting back, I think I kind of got off a little bit. So let me get back to me asking God, what was this thing that I was missing? And when I receive this thing, it just seemed like everything is going to click. For many, many, many years, I would ask myself and ask God that question, or seek to find out what this thing was. So for me, one day I was in this coaching session. If I'm not mistaken, it was a VIP session that I was in. And before I went into that VIP session, one of the things that the person that was going to actually be conducting this session, just so we could prepare for it, just send her over some things that would help her better understand what it is that I needed and how we can get through this session smoothly. And so one of the things I put down was, for whatever reason, I just said, I feel this disconnect in my life. I'm not sure what it is, but what I believe is that when I find out what this is, I'm going to be okay, because nothing is clicking for me in life. And I was always at this point of starting things and not finishing. Sometimes things just got bored to me. But like I said, I had to distract myself from this trauma and the things that I was dealing with. So we get into this session, not intentionally was trying to talk about the abuse and things that I suffered as a child, but for whatever reason it came up, and I started sharing with her that this happened to me as a child. And I, even though I had written that statement down, I also voiced it, that I just really wanted to know what this thing is that's causing me not to be able to connect the dots in my life, and not to be able to move forward in my life, but always in this place of turmoil. I used to call it a vicious cycle, always in this vicious cycle. And even though I would, they say you take a step forward, you get two backs, I would just crash and burn sometimes. And so that session ended. I talked about that. Of course, she didn't mention nothing to me about an answer to that question or that statement that I made. But maybe it could have been that same day that God spoke to me and said, it's not that you need something to connect in your life, it's what you disconnected from that has put you in these cycles, these negative patterns, that this is why you feel that nothing is clicking, because you disconnected from it. And because I disconnected from it, I was never able to deal with it. When I disconnected, there was no me being aware of it, or me acknowledging it, I should say. I was aware that this had happened to me, but I was not at this point acknowledging it. And what you don't acknowledge, you're never able to overcome. And just because you don't acknowledge something doesn't make it go away. It doesn't make it disappear, doesn't make your life better, because you don't acknowledge it. So we have to acknowledge that whatever happened to me to cause this trauma in my life, we have to acknowledge that in order to uproot it. And also, we have to acknowledge that the trauma is in our life, not that we're bowing down to trauma, but we do have to acknowledge that when we respond, that this could be a trauma response. That because I stay in the background, this could be just me protecting myself because of trauma, because I don't feel worthy or deserving that I should have more in life. This stems from trauma. So we do have to acknowledge it, because it's more than just a word. You know, if it was just a word, I think we will all be okay. But trauma is more than just a word. It can take action in our life, or at least have us taking actions that are not beneficial to our life, that are not in alignment with our purpose, in alignment with who God created us to be, in alignment with our identity. So we do have to acknowledge that I'm reacting this way because of the trauma. I connect with certain people. I get into certain relationships because of the trauma. Every relationship I get in, I mess it up because of the trauma. Now, I did get into some relationship because of trauma, but as far as friendships, thankfully, none of my friendships were shipwrecked, so to speak, because of the trauma that I experienced. However, I do know that when we're moving through life and we're dealing with trauma, we do tend to attract people in our lives that are going through the same thing. So it's like a mirror. We are mirroring other people in our life. And I do want to speak about that. I used to always wonder why people would say, you don't attract who you desire, you attract who you are. And I would find myself in certain relationships. And when the relationship was over, it was always like, why in the world will I have been in that relationship? Like, this person is nothing like me, like where there is no alignment or anything like that. But when I started my healing journey, when God showed me that that was a disconnect and I committed to healing, I was able to realize that even though I wasn't acting the same way someone else was, or showing up as someone else, that because those things were still in me, I was attracting those things. I remember this one relationship, I was the calm person and the other person was the chaotic person. However, my calm and that person's chaos was still stem from trauma. Now, I just said trauma was caused a lot of chaos in my life. So where did the calm come from? The calm for me, I had my calm confused with peace. So I thought I was just this peaceful person. But what I realized through my healing journey is that I was a calm person. And I chose calmness because I did not want to find myself in chaotic situations. So I remained calm because I know if there was going to be chaos, there was also going to be a lot of crazy and me acting just crazy, okay? Acting chaotic. So I chose calm, which I thought was peace, until I realized it wasn't peace. And I, for the most part, stayed away from chaotic people because they could disrupt my calm, and now I'm chaotic right along with them. So through that situation and through healing, I realized why I was with this particular person, because we were both operating from a place of trauma, and trauma was a GPS system, and trauma leads you to trauma. Just like healing can be your GPS system, and healing will lead you to healing, or peace will lead you to peace. You will attract those people in your life, because a chaotic person doesn't want to be around peace. It can't operate like that. And a truly peaceful person is not going to operate in chaos. So I was attracting who I had become, and not become because I wanted to, who trauma had made me to be. And so back to God just revealing different things to me. So when this happened, when I had the business meeting and then God showing me this, I was 50 years old when God showed me that. Right now, I'm almost 52. So I just want to say that because of the time that I dealt with the trauma, or I didn't deal with it. At the time that I lived with the trauma and was led by the trauma and guided by the trauma from the ages of 12 to 50. So that's a long time. And what I realized in that, when I talk about trauma and I mentioned how it altered my identity, what I realized was that I had become who I needed to become in order to survive the trauma. And that wasn't necessarily who God intended for me to become. But in order to survive that trauma, I had become who I needed to be. So at 50, I realized that I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I was because, again, trauma had altered my identity and had me showing up as who I had become and not as who God created me to be. And so that was part of my healing journey. And I started seeking God as to who did you create me to be. And I write about that in my book, Triumphant, A Journey from Trauma to Triumph. And I'm going to put that link in the description below. You can get the paperback or the ebook. So that link will be in there, which will lead you to my website, LisaLYoumans.com. And there's other things on the website that you can also pick up, such as my healing code, which is 7 biblical declarations. Now, this is really starting your healing or to just strengthening you where you're at when when we're decreeing and declaring God's word over our life. Even though we may not be there right now, and when we're going, that's why it's important to heal. So when we're speaking things over our life, the right things now, when we're taking on new thoughts and we're taking in information, we're able to receive what it is that we're speaking, because it's more than just speaking. We do have to heal when it comes to these particular things. And I'm just going to speak on that a little bit, because there's the verse in the Bible that says you can't pour new wine into old wineskins, and I have a chapter on that. So what I mean by that, there were times, because I wasn't healed, the unhealed me, and in the book I refer to that as the old wineskins, who trauma had formed me to be and altered me to be. And there was a time in my life where, because I dissociated, I thought it was everything else except for what it was. So it's like, okay, I need new information. I need to get my life together. I need to get a vision, start doing some goals. And I started that journey. And I'm not saying that was bad in and of itself. However, the thing was, there was always going to be a cap on the potential of those things in my life. I was never able to maximize the potential of those things because I wasn't healed. So I was taking all of this new information and trying to take these new habits and new way of living and put it into something that was not healed, that was broken, that was distorted, and put it into all of that. And it was not going to happen. And I'm glad I got all of that information. However, there did become a point in my life where it was just frustrating. So as I was like, I've been on this journey for a while of this self-development, getting myself together. And it didn't seem like after a while that nothing was happening. Again, of course, at the beginning, things were happening for me and I was moving forward. But because the root was still there, it had me planted where I had always been, in trauma, being led by trauma, those same trauma responses, the emotions, the reactions, the connecting to sometimes the wrong people, because I was rooted in that and I needed to uproot and heal. Again, not acknowledging doesn't make it go away. Staying unaware, being ignorant of it doesn't make it go away. Pushing it to the side, it doesn't make it go away. And I know sometimes these are defense mechanisms for us to just get through life. However, the best defense is healing. The best defense is deliverance. The best defense is becoming whole. The best defense is breakthrough. The best defense is a therapy session or some therapy sessions. The best defense is talking about it, speaking about it, and just figuring out what this trauma is doing to your life. The best defense is exposing the trauma in your life. And I also mentioned that it can silence your voice and it can have you showing up whispering instead of roaring, because that's what trauma does, especially in my situation. When there's sexual abuse, especially childhood sexual abuse, there's a secrecy that comes with that. People are forced into it. Some people are forced into it through the perpetrator making it like kind and making like you're going to protect them and making you make a promise, but not saying it in a way that they're making you. But of course, they're making you. They have control over you at this point. So there was a lot of secrecy in my life. There was a lot of me dialing back and not really speaking up. I became very passive, and I was just going through life passively, through situations passively, even in relationships, very passive in those relationships. Not that I suffered any abuse in the relationships that I was in, not that, but it was still the mindset that I carried into those particular relationships. And I would speak up, but for the most part, it was very, very passive and just letting things go. And then sometimes go to the point where you get chaotic because you probably didn't want to show this side of you. And now it has gotten to that point because you didn't deal with it. And the person is going to think that it's okay for them to treat you a certain way. But we all have our breaking point. So those are just some of the things that trauma caused in my life, and just that root of how trauma entered into my life. And I'm coming to a close, but I do want to read this excerpt from my book also. And it just talk about the changes that happen in life and how change can actually chain, CHAIN, put chains on you. So life is always changing from one moment to the next in one way or another. These changes are not always visible to the naked eye, at least not at the particular moment that they take place. We unknowingly are affected by these changes, whether we welcome them or not. They will affect us directly or indirectly. These changes travel through moments, reshaping time while creating memories, some good, others bad. Some of these changes are welcome and embraced while others are not. And no matter how hard you try to reject them, you just can't seem to shake them. They latch onto you through memories that become trespassers of your serenity, spoilers of your peace, and savages to your sanity. And these are changes that are brought on by trauma. And again, this is why, regardless of what your age is now, you just have to acknowledge, because you're going to keep going through these changes. Right now, where I'm at in life, when I think about it, I really can't imagine continuing on that cycle, because I got off of that cycle and now I'm in a different cycle of healing, a cycle of moving forward, a cycle of prosperity, a cycle of completion. I never completed anything. The cycle of being kind to myself, so to speak. A cycle where I'm not in this self-sabotage situation, but whatever I'm setting out to do, I'm determined to do those things, because trauma really stole a lot from my life, really took a lot from my life. And really, because by now, and I know people talk about, it's just God's time and this just where you at. That's not necessarily true, because there's some things that can come into our life, or we're allowed to enter into our life. And I'm right when I say when we're allowed to enter into our lives, I'm not saying that we're allowing trauma to enter into our lives, but just an overall example. There are some things that can come and that can slow up our progress. And that's what trauma does. It slows your progress. And, how do you know which way to go when you're caught up in this cycle of chaos and confusion and all of the other things? So acknowledge that this is where you're at in life. Acknowledge that some of the things that you're doing in life is because of the trauma. We must acknowledge these things if we want to be able to move forward in life. So you have to acknowledge what happened to you that opened the door for trauma to come in. Acknowledge those things, and these things can be painful. Healing, even though we all want to be healed, sometimes healing is not the most beautiful process. It doesn't come sometimes without pain, and us having to confront certain things, us having to confront people, us having to confront ourselves. And we have to acknowledge those things when we think about healing, and when we think about maybe someone having surgery. And of course, you have the anesthesia while you're going through the surgery, so you don't feel the cuts and you don't feel all of the other things that are going on. However, when you begin to heal, you feel the soreness, you feel the pain, the cuts, you feel the scars as you begin to heal up. And some processes take longer than others when it comes to healing. So when someone acknowledges their trauma, they could be healed in a couple of months, but for somebody else it could be a couple of years. But it's the process that we are going through, and even in that, we don't want to prolong the process, because like when you go through the surgery and your doctor gives you these certain things to do and these certain guidelines to follow for you to heal properly, so you can get to where you need to be. If they say it's going to take 6 weeks, but if you're not doing the things, it could take 6 months, because you may have relapses in that particular process, or something may get infected in that particular process. So the same thing, this healing journey, you're stepping into this healing journey of trauma, you may already be there. And I just encourage you to just keep moving forward, because you will get on the other side of the pain, and continue to do what you need to do so there are no relapse. If you know this certain situation, or these certain people, certain type of people, certain relationships that you need to like walk away from now to heal, like you're in rehab and you need to heal, then you have to do that, because you don't want to be in a situation where the wound continue to be reopened. When we have a cut on our hands, and that scab where the skin is like hard, and you pick it off, if you do it too soon, of course, it's like you're kind of starting that process over. You don't want to be in a situation where it keeps taking the scab off, keeps you going back into this cycle where you're relapsing in your healing journey. So you don't want to do that. So you want to make sure that you are in a place where you are going to heal properly. Okay, you want to make sure you're in a place where you're going to be able to heal properly. So, and I just encourage you to acknowledge what happened to you, to acknowledge that there's trauma there. And if you come to a realization that you did dissociate yourself from this trauma, I pray that you not so much reconnect and embrace the trauma, but just acknowledge that this is what's causing me the issues in my life. Like I had to acknowledge that these are the things that are causing all of these issues in my life. I had to acknowledge those things, right? So that I can get to a place of healing in my life. And healing is always the best thing. Now, it may not always feel like the best thing to go through, but it is always the best thing for you, because you go through life better when you are a healed person, when you are a whole person. You choose better when you're healed and when you're whole. So I just want to say, get yourself in a place where you're going to heal. Again, there's a couple of resources. Of course, I have my book, From Trauma to Triumph, and it's not just about what happened to me, but I go through the process of resetting, how God took me through a season of reset, and how you become healed, you become restored, and you become made whole. So my prayer is that everything that you lost, everything that trauma stole from you, every delay that it caused you, I pray that you be made whole, so that you can really get to the place where God will have you, so that you can really get into purpose and stop being all over the place. And whatever it is you need to do, and do those things. If you need to forgive, if you need to let go of some things. And forgiving is not saying, okay, the person wasn't wrong and you got to be with this person, you got to be around this person and still do life with this person now. But forgiving, when we think about forgiveness, it's for us and not for that individual. So free yourself by forgiving whoever it was that did whatever it was to you. Sometimes we can cause trauma in our own life. So sometimes we have to forgive ourselves. And even in that, we don't want to acknowledge that we could hurt ourselves or we can cause such disruption in our life. But we do have to forgive ourselves, forgive people that hurt you, forgive the person that abandoned you, forgive the person that rejected you, forgive the person that offended you. Whatever it was, you must acknowledge, you must confront. Like when I open up, I said, you're in a safe space. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to play it safe. And when it comes to trauma, we can't play it safe. When we think about someone that has a life-threatening disease and it went too far, they didn't catch it at the beginning. And now the doctor comes and he says, we have to do some radical treatment. So when they do this radical treatment, of course, they have all the perimeters not to further hurt the individual, but they're not really playing it safe because they have to get at what's taking the life out of this person. And when we think about trauma, we got to get at what's taking the life out of you. When God revealed to me all of the things that I was 50 at the beginning, that was probably like in October, November, but in the beginning of that next year, which was last year, in the beginning of 2024, I was like, hey, I'm getting radical. So I'm taking this first 6 months, and of course it went on, that I'm just going to focus on my healing. I wasn't trying to help anybody else. I wasn't trying to extend myself further than I needed to extend myself. Sometimes you have to put yourself on bed rest, so to speak. Like, again, when we talked about the surgery, you have to put yourself on bed rest. Not that you're sitting around, you're not doing anything, but you're focusing on your healing. Now, I still had to get up and show up for the work and the work that I do. I still had to get up and show up for those type of things. I still went to different events, but I had to scale back a whole lot of things because I needed my energy. I needed my time. I needed my mind to be in a place that I needed to be, to move and navigate through the healing journey, to move and be in a place where I was hearing from God and I was able to see what God was showing me, even in the healing process. So when things came up, I didn't ignore those things. I dealt with those things. So if you got to put yourself on bed rest, put yourself on bed rest so that you can get through your healing journey out of trauma. We're on this journey straight out of trauma, going from trauma to triumph. You can be triumphant in your journey. So that's really all I have for this episode. Like, subscribe, and continue to share these series out because it's a lot of people that's dealing with trauma, regardless of how it came into their life. But there are countless of people that are dealing, I don't even want to say dealing with it. Their lives are being controlled by trauma. Their lives are being destroyed by trauma. Their lives are being held up by trauma. So continue to share this out. Remember this, even in the silence, God speaks. Even in the pain, He is present. You're not alone on this journey. Heaven is walking with you. Until next time, rest in the truth that you are not what happened to you. Trauma may have marked your journey, but it doesn't get the final word. You are who He's healing you to become. Until we meet again, I'm Lisa L. Youmans, and thank you for tuning into the Straight Out of Trauma series.